So the economy has been looking pretty good lately, and we're going to go over a couple things when it comes to the economy, specifically when it comes to the stock market and inflation, and we're going to try to predict or understand where the Federal Reserve and where the economic policy will be going from the future. So let's start with the stock market. Obviously, in April, the stock market took quite a hit. A lot of this came from trade talks from President Trump, specifically when it came to tariffs. Now, on April 2nd, the president had his Liberation Day, as he called it, and of course, the stock market plummeted from that day going forward for a few days. So if we look at some of the numbers, on April 2nd, the S&P closed around 5,670. Now, it opened the next day on April 3rd around 5,492, so a pretty big drop, and it closed at 5,396. So a really bad day on the market. It was down 4.8%, and things didn't look good. However, it got worse because the next day it opened at 5,292 and closed at 5,074. This was a 10.5% drop. Now, it went all the way down to 4,953. This is for the S&P 500. For a total loss of 12.5% within just a couple of days. So right about here was when many people were saying there's going to be a recession, things are looking really bad. And obviously on the stock market, things weren't looking good at the moment. However, it was important that you stay calm during this time. And honestly, I think that there should be some accountability for others scaring people. A lot of people, if they pulled out their money during that time, they locked in a loss. However, if you put money into the stock market, I'll explain why, but you would have made money. Now, it can be scary when the stock market drops, and it does happen, and this was a very bad drop. A 12.5% drop was pretty tough, and mathematically, it's hard to come back from a 12.5% drop with numbers these big so quickly. But let me explain why we're back and better than ever. So right now, the S&P 500 is around 6,014. It's down a little bit today, but it was up yesterday over $6,000. Now, if you remember, I said that the stock market was down all the way to $4,900. So that's a $1,000 increase, which is a massive 22% increase. And we needed something like that. Now, the stock market highs were around 6,144 for the S&P 500. So we're not quite there yet, but we are looking pretty good overall. Since February 19th, we are down a little bit, but since March, when the trade talks started to happen, we are way up. So what have we learned here? I think one thing to think about is when you're afraid of a stock market crash or a recession, that is not a time to be emotional and pull your money out of the stock market. Hold on to your money. The stock market will recover. It always does. So don't freak out. Don't pull your money out of your retirement account at that time because all you're doing is locking in your losses. So before we come to a conclusion, let's go to the second discussion topic today, which is inflation. The CPI report from the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics released its May 2025 inflation rate, which is at 0.1%. Now, a few things to understand is that 0.1% is the month change from April. Technically, inflation was up from April 0.1%. April was up 0.2%. From March, which was down 0.1% from February, so forth and so on. So technically inflation is up and it's almost always up. And the Federal Reserve's goal is to have inflation around 2% over a 12-month period. Right now, inflation is at a 2.4% inflation for a 12-month period, which means it's 0.4% higher than what the Federal Reserve's goal is. Now, the Federal Reserve has a goal of 2%, not less, not more, 2%. So when inflation goes down, that's a good thing for prices, of course, but we don't want to see price deflation. That's why they put their goal at 2%. So it's at 2.4%, which is really good because before February, we had inflation at 0.5%, 0.4%, 0.3%. It was going up and down. It started to cool in 2024, but it was terrible in 2022 and 2023. And 2024 saw some relief, but over the last 5 months, it's looking a lot better. So what are we looking at? Egg prices were technically up in the month of May. I think they peaked around $3.50 for a dozen, and they were down to around $3.01, $3.02. in early April. Now, we have to remember, just a couple months ago, they were over $8 per dozen. That's when they peaked. If you look at this chart here, it shows they plummeted all the way down to $3. They went up just slightly in May, and they're way down again in June. Energy saw a massive price drop at 1.7%, and that's mainly due to gasoline prices. Gasoline prices, you should be noticing, are a little bit better over the last couple months than they have been post-pandemic. So let's talk about where we're at with the economy. Should you be positive? Should you be afraid? Should you be scared? Here's my take. Right now, I look at the Federal Reserve. Now, the Federal Reserve is basically our central bank for the United States. Their main goal is really to control the money supply and inflation. Their biggest thing is they want to help inflation stay around 2%. They want to keep the job market strong, and they use the money supply. They decrease interest rates to do these things. Right now, Federal Reserve Jerome Powell is a little nervous to drop interest rates because of President Trump's trade talks. Now, the trade talks have surprisingly gone pretty well. He's making some deals, and it looks like today he made some deals with China. So we should be looking at maybe the Federal Reserve easing up. But right now, Jerome Powell and the Federal Reserve, they're afraid that if Donald Trump doesn't go through with these deals, or he pushes back tariffs at a large number, that prices will skyrocket. If you think about it, that's kind of what tariffs will do. They're essentially a tax, and taxes mean prices are going up. The Federal Reserve is reluctant to drop interest rates because think of this, if interest rates go up, that means spending goes up. When spending goes up, demand goes up. What goes up with demand? Prices go up. The Federal Reserve, they're afraid that if they drop interest rates, the economy will keep moving, we'll spend more, will demand more, prices will go up from our demand, and then if Donald Trump puts in tariffs, the Federal Reserve prices will go up even more, reversing all the positive progress we've had on inflation. What do I think should happen? What do I think is going to happen? I think that the Federal Reserve is going to continue to wait Donald Trump and see what he does. If he continues with the solid deals he's made with the UK and with China, then I think that the Federal Reserve, after a few months, they see some stability, they might slowly drop interest rates again. The job market needs to continue to be strong. If the job market struggles, they might force the issue and have to drop interest rates to get that money moving. Overall, what do I think that this economy looks like for personal finances? I think right now I'm still optimistic. I'm going up slightly from cautiously optimistic to optimistic, but with some shifty eyes. So I think things are looking pretty good, pretty strong. The numbers don't lie. The last 4 or 5 months have looked good when it comes to prices, inflation. The job market is strong. It's not amazing, but it's strong. What I personally would love to see is an extremely strong job market in the United States, coupled with long-term quality inflation rates. And then I would be thumbs up, positive, extremely optimistic, no shifty eyes, no cautious. We'll have to wait for at least 4, 5, 6 months to see, make sure everything's going in the right direction before I get to that point. But right now, I'm overall positive. Thanks for watching. Check out freedomfinances.org for more daily updates on the economy, personal finances, and more finance news.